As the Golden Age progressed, magic rarely strayed far from Eastern imagery. Maskelyne's greatest and most technically complex levitation, performed in 1901, was presented as an Indian mystery in a playlet called The Entranced Fakir.
Before The Entranced Fakir, I think it's safe to say that magicians had some inkling. There was a personal pride in being able to solve these mysteries. And they went to Maskelyne's theater and they were able to discern some of the secrets. But with The Entranced Fakir, he'd come up with a new formula of making someone float. And it was a combination of mechanical devices and optical devices. And I think we now see it was the perfect combination.
The levitation was probably the most astounding thing that anyone had ever seen on a stage. What the audience would have seen is a figure floating horizontally to a height of about possibly 10 to 12 feet.
It amazes not just the public, but magicians. Nobody can figure out how on earth it's done. And this, of course, annoys magicians, because magicians like to be inspired and borrow from each other. One of the people who's most upset is Harry Keller, his main American counterpart.
Harry Keller was an extraordinary figure. It's quite likely that he was the basis for the figure that we now know as the Wizard of Oz, because when that book was written, Keller was the most popular magician in America at the time. He was an amazing artist and apparently a great performer, but he was a thief. But it wasn't only illusions that Keller lifted. He would also take advertising matter, poster designs, and steal them. But the one thing that has to be said about him is that he did steal them very well, by all accounts, and very often improved on the original.
Keller comes over to the Egyptian Hall and watches this performance about 50 times and is totally baffled, like the rest of the audience, and has to know. So one night, he jumps up on stage, he gets up on stage during the performance, and all of a sudden the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows Keller's on stage, and he might find out the secret. Well, and the rest, he brings it back to America and performs it as the Levitation of Princess Karnak. And that is the levitation that spawned a revolution in levitations in American magic.
What was amazing about Keller's achievement with it was that Keller was presenting a touring show, travelling from one theatre to the next, and every time that they moved, this incredibly elaborate system of pulleys and levers and wires had to be set up in the new theatre. And that was something that even astounded Maskelyne, who secretly got somebody to take a photograph of Keller's rig. One thing that I think people neglect to see is what a huge business magic was in those days. Magicians could earn a great deal of money.
Part of the golden age of magic, the reason it was so great, was that you had a bunch of magicians competing and trying to draw audiences into the theater. And the way that they did it was by creating more and more fantastic wonders that sounded great on a poster. And let's cut to the chase. It was all about getting people into the theater and selling tickets. So by saying that someone could float in the air, by saying that someone would make a donkey disappear, by someone saying that someone would make an elephant disappear or a horse disappear, they were all topping each other. And what we see is that within a couple generations, magic increased exponentially in terms of the development, because it had to have an appeal to the audience, it had to sound fantastic and wonderful, and it had to deliver.
The jewel in the crown of any Golden Age magic show came to be its levitation. So it was natural that magicians sought the secret of what they believed to be the most mysterious and exotic levitation performed in the Far East since the 15th century, the Indian rope trick.
The magician throws a rope up in the air, and he gets a little boy to climb up the rope. And the little boy disappears when he gets to the top of the rope, out of sight. Then the magician climbs the rope after him with a big scimitar and chops about in the air, and bits of the boy's body fall to the ground. And then he climbs down again, and the rope falls down. And then he picks up the bits of the body, puts them in a basket, and waves his magic wand or says the magic incantation, and out comes the boy completely restored.
And I think it's a powerful story on a lot of levels. It's about father-son relationship. It's about boy becoming man. If we want to look at the different parts of it, well, one, we have a levitation in a sense. The child can, climb up this rope. Mutilation, where you get a kind of a death and then a regeneration.
This story exists in every country there is. In England, it's Jack and the Beanstalk. A thing going up to heaven and out of sight and so on, somebody climbing up it. In China, they climbed up to steal peaches from heaven. And then there's Jacob's ladder in the Bible. It's a universal idea.
The very latest research into the Indian rope trick by Dr. Peter Lamont suggests that, contrary to popular belief at the time, the trick doesn't really date back to the 1400s at all. The legend was actually started by a hoax newspaper article published by the Chicago Tribune in 1890.
Once the legend of the Indian rope trick starts to spread, Western magicians go to India and they look for the Indian rope trick in India. They offer large rewards to anyone who can perform the trick. They search and they ask and they spend many hours and weeks and months looking all over India for anyone who can perform the trick. And of course, they can't find anybody. Indeed, what they find out is that nobody in India has heard of the trick. One of the first pieces of visual evidence for the rope trick appears in 1919, when Captain Holmes says that he's photographed the Indian rope trick. Well, the Magic Circle look into this. They actually interviewed Holmes and asked him what was going on, and eventually Holmes confessed. He said, well, no, I didn't actually see the Indian rope trick. I just saw a boy balancing on top of a pole.
Pole balancing is a traditional Indian stunt performed by gypsy acrobats. And Colonel Holmes was only the first in a long line of people claiming, erroneously, to have captured the mystery on film. But his story only served to stir up further avid interest in the rope trick.
The British Army in the 1930s produced a piece of footage in which an Indian fakir hurls a rope up into the air, a boy climbs up and disappears, and the crowd of British soldiers are incredibly impressed with what they see. What's interesting about the bit of footage is if you look very closely, you'll notice that the people start to look up before the rope rises up into the air. And what that tells you is it's reverse footage. That what they've done is have a rope supported in the air and then let it go and then reverse the footage. If you watch very closely as the boy climbs up the rope, you'll also notice that you can see the pole behind the rope.
Although the appearance of the Indian rope trick could be created using trick film photography, the British Magic Circle joined the debate in 1934 by offering a prize of 500 guineas to anyone who could perform the genuine illusion live.
One man came forward who called himself Karachi. There was a debate about who Karachi was, about where he came from. Was he from Darjeeling? Was he from Assam? His real name was Arthur, and he was from Plymouth. And he performed a version of the Indian rope trick in Hertfordshire in a storm, in which the rope managed to move up about 4 feet. His boy, who we now know is called Cyril, dressed in Indian robes, climbed up to the top, wobbled a bit and came down again. The Magic Circle saw this. They said, we're not paying you a penny. That's not the legendary Indian rope trick. But the public weren't convinced either way, and there was a bit of a debate in the press. Should he get the money? Shouldn't he get the money? He didn't get the money.